The Subcommittee on Housing and Insurance will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess of the committee at any time. This hearing is entitled HUD Oversight, Testimony of the HUD Inspector General. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit extraneous materials to the chair for inclusion in the record. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes to give an opening statement. Today, the subcommittee will hear from the Inspector General of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, the Honorable Ms. Ray Oliver Davis. We welcome your testimony today and thank you for all your work to ensure that HUD operates more effectively for the people it serves and the taxpayers who fund its programs. Indeed, it is no small task to oversee an agency like HUD with a long documented record of waste, fraud, abuse, and mismanagement. Most recently, the Office of Inspector General reported that it found $950 million in HUD funds that could be redirected and recovered $49 million in overdue collections. Your office has also made numerous recommendations that, if executed, would save taxpayers tens of billions of dollars. In addition, Ms. Oliver Davis, your team pursued enforcement actions that resulted in 51 criminal convictions, 5 civil actions, 12 government debarment actions, and $28 million in restitution and judgments. So an impressive record. These actions save taxpayers money and help protect the very people HUD is supposed to be helping, which is why we have proposed legislation along with this hearing to make the IGs appear before this committee an annual event. And the work of the Inspector General has only gotten tougher, more complicated, and even more essential in recent years. HUD's annual budget has grown from $44 billion in 2015 to $75 billion today, a 70% increase. Further, as a result of the spending on natural disasters as well as COVID, HUD now manages over $100 billion in federal grants. That's a staggering amount, and as you reported, Ms. Oliver Davis, HUD has had numerous challenges in overseeing grant money for programs like the Community Development Block Grant for disaster recovery. CDBG-DR, as it's known, Community Development Block Grants for Disaster Recovery, is now HUD's single largest grant. And believe it or not, it is a program that has never been formally authorized by Congress. In fact, most of HUD's programs are funded each year, but remain unauthorized. These include programs for the nation's most vulnerable populations, such as public housing, Section 8, and health and safety programs. It's a problem that I believe this subcommittee must address to ensure that HUD receives proper oversight. A lapse in authorization is also a lapse by Congress in providing the scrutiny that HUD of all agencies needs. It is clear to me that we must have a closer look at HUD's management, organization structure, and the way it operates. Creating a smarter, better run, more efficient HUD should be a goal we all share, which is why I have proposed setting up a new bipartisan independent commission to study what works and what does not work within HUD's current organization. And they would report back to Congress on how we can streamline HUD's operations to better get productivity and the actual outcomes that we seek for the same kinds of dollars we're currently spending. Thankfully, however, we are able to hear from the Inspector General today, whose boots on the ground at HUD have done important work in highlighting some of the agency's most serious deficiencies. Notably, Ms. Oliver Davis and her team have found a shocking abundance of health and safety concerns in HUD-assisted properties. For example, one report identified almost 33,000, quote, life-threatening exigent health and safety issues in public housing. These homes should be safe for their residents. Another identified poor physical conditions in multifamily housing developments, as well as a failure of HUD to flag these conditions. And yet another one reported inadequate oversight of the lead-based remediation in HUD properties, a particular problem for young children who are susceptible to the harmful effects of lead. This is particularly concerning as HUD's core mission as a federal agency is to provide decent, safe, sanitary, and affordable housing. I expect that HUD will do all in its power to immediately address these failures that the IG has identified. And it's quite honestly unacceptable if they should not do so, because lives are indeed at stake. All of this only shines a light on why the testimony and the work of the HUD Inspector General is so critical. Ms. Oliver Davis, we look forward to hearing your remarks and working with you on ways to address these and other issues for what I would say is an agency with significant challenges. Thank you, and I now turn it over to our ranking member for his remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me, before I get into my remarks, say that I do agree that maybe we should spend some time looking at programs, looking at those that work and those that can be improved. And Chairman, I've had this discussion. Housing is less affordable today than it has been in the last forever. This is true for both rental housing and home ownership, and the lack of affordable housing has fueled a national crisis of housing and homelessness. HUD is on the forefront in trying to respond to the devastating impacts of this crisis, though the pursuit of transforming housing and community building policies and programs with the mission of creating strong, sustainable, and inclusive communities and quality, affordable housing. The HUD Office of Inspector General plays an important role in advancing the integrity, efficiency, and the effectiveness of these policies and programs. We're fortunate to have this perspective today from our Inspector General, Oliver Davis, and before I proceed any further, I want to take some time to just say that I think your report is very valuable to us, but the memo that my Republican colleagues put forth looks at funding trends between the year of fiscal year 2017 and 2023. First, rather than 5 years, this would be a period of 7 years. That is a small but very important detail. Second, the increase from fiscal year 2017 to 2023 in regular appropriations, not accounting for emergency funding, would be $20.4 billion. More than half of this increase was driven by increases in per unit costs to renew existing subsidies, which are primarily driven by increasing rents in March of 2017. The average monthly cost of a voucher was $682 per month. In March 2023, it was $896 per month, according to HUD. That is a 30% increase in rent costs from 2017 to 2023. This is a cost, is the result of inaction on the affordable housing crisis by Congress, including the inability to pass any of the number of bills that Democrats have put forward to lower costs. I'm pleased that this week, under the leadership of Ranking Member Maxine Waters, Congress has again seen the introduction of the Housing Crisis Response Act, the ending of homelessness through the Ending Homelessness Act, and the Down Payment Toward Equity Act. It is my continued hope that this committee can find bipartisan support on a housing bill of substance during this term. Another $2.98 billion of the increase in funding for HUD from fiscal year 2017 to fiscal year 2023 is attributable to congressional directed spending, earmarks, whatever we want to call it, which were not funded in fiscal year 2017, but were funded at $2.98 billion in fiscal year 2023. These two factors, rental assistance costs and earmarks, account for most of the increased funding for HUD since fiscal year 2017, 65% of the increase excluding emergency rental assistance. Despite increased funding at HUD, several challenges remain. In the period between 2012 and 2019, the number of full-time equivalent employees at HUD declined from 8,576 to 6,837. This was a reduction of 20% and presented serious risk to HUD's ability to deliver on its mission. President Biden's fiscal year 2024 budget requests funding for 8,635 full-time employees, which is still below the capacity of the agency in 2012. As noted in testimony, a common theme in HUD OIG oversight findings has been that HUD does not have the capacity necessary to address the challenges it faces, and that the department is underfunded and understaffed. And while the memo put out by my Republican colleagues point out that HUD had 985 outstanding recommendations open from OIG, we should also note that that number is down from 2,335 in 2027, a reduction of more than half. Mr. Chairman, I will forego the remainder of my comments and use them during the question and answer period. Thank you.
Thank the ranking member. Today we welcome the testimony of Inspector General Ray Oliver Davis. She was sworn in as the Inspector General for HUD on January 23rd of 2019. Previously, she served as the Acting Assistant Inspector General at HUD, and then prior to that as the Chief Investigative Counsel for the Office of the Special Inspector General for the Troubled Asset Relief Program. She earned her Juris Doctor degree from the University of Memphis. We thank you for taking your time to be here. Without objection, your written statements will be made part of the record. Inspector General Oliver Davis, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to give your oral remarks.
Good afternoon, Chairman Davidson, Ranking Member Cleaver, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to testify about my office's oversight of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. HUD plays a critical role in the American economy, providing billions of dollars for rental assistance, preventing homelessness, and recovering from disasters, as well as ensuring trillions of dollars for mortgage insurance and guaranteeing trillions of dollars in housing finance. The stakes are high for HUD and its 40,000 program participants. If they do not deliver, there are significant economic and health impacts on communities and vulnerable families. The supply of affordable housing has reached unthinkable levels, and many low-income families have been waiting for vouchers to help them find a home to rent. What is available has fallen into disrepair, exposing residents to health hazards like mold, infestations, lead-based paint, or collapsing structures. Communities ravaged by natural disasters have been waiting years for HUD funding to help them recover and build back stronger. HUD faces significant challenges in executing its programs, many of which are long-standing because they are complex and the solutions are not easy. For example, there is a well-known backlog of deferred maintenance in America's public housing stock, which is the root cause of many physical condition problems in those buildings, and there is not enough funding available to fix these problems. HUD cannot control that, but it can control how it oversees public housing authorities through the inspection process, and HUD can control how it monitors the remedying of deficiencies found during inspections. We recently issued reports finding that HUD needs to do more to ensure inspections happen timely and that those with historically poor scores receive priority for inspections. We also found HUD's field offices need to be more consistent in their oversight of the housing authorities' handling of emergency health and safety findings and inspections. Oversight of housing authorities and other program participants is a major key to HUD's success. HUD must ensure they execute effectively, efficiently, and with integrity. HUD is also facing enterprise-level challenges. HUD staffing has decreased over the years while its program responsibilities have grown. Many of its experts are retiring, which strains the support that it provides participants and threatens their customer experience. HUD has also been uniquely challenged in managing IT modernization and cybersecurity efforts, resulting in too many of its programs running on old systems that were not built for today's business world and are not optimized to gather the right information nor to protect it. My office's approach is to focus on the spaces that HUD can and should control and help them to deliver the best they possibly can. Since becoming the HUD Inspector General, my goal has been to make a difference, and our strategy is centered on that goal. Last year, we released our first Priority Open Recommendations report, highlighting the open recommendations that could have the greatest impact. This effort helped push HUD to bolster its oversight of assisted housing near contaminated sites, strengthen its hiring process, close gaps in cybersecurity framework, and enhance its strategy for increasing utilization of vouchers. HUD deserves recognition for this significant progress. There is more work to be done. Looking forward, 2 areas of focus for my office are safety hazards in assisted housing and fraud risk management. We are attacking safety hazards in assisted housing at the community level by reviewing unit conditions and lead hazard management at housing authorities across the country. We've increased criminal investigations into bad actors in this space, targeting landlords, contractors, and inspectors who knowingly fail to follow environmental and safety requirements or who sexually assault or harass tenants. We have also recommended HUD review fraud risk in each of its programs and enhance controls that prevent fraud. HUD's historical position has been that its grantees are primarily responsible for managing fraud risk. Our oversight has shown that many grantees struggle in this area, especially those responding to disasters that are already challenged in building capacity and establishing strong internal controls. We have launched our own audits to review fraud risk and management practices at the Puerto Rico Department of Housing, who is currently overseeing $20 billion in HUD funding, as well as several entities that received pandemic emergency solution grants. Congress appropriated overall $4 billion for this program during the pandemic, which represents a 1,391% increase in funding for these grantees. As we continue to fight fraud, waste, abuse, mismanagement, and misconduct in HUD's programs, we look forward to working with this committee to help HUD improve its delivery for Americans, and I look forward to answering your questions today.
Thank you, Ms. Oliver Davis. We'll now turn to member questions. I recognize myself for 5 minutes for questioning. Ms. Oliver Davis, as I noted in my opening remarks, almost every single HUD program is funded, but technically unauthorized. This means that they are not receiving the proper scrutiny from Congress, and your office has conducted numerous audits, investigations, and other actions that further demonstrate a critical need for actual oversight. For example, in one of your reports published last month, you noted that HUD is in violation of the Payment Integrity Information Act of 2019 when they failed to report improper and unknown payment estimates for the Office of Public and Indian Housing's tenant-based rental assistance program and the Office of Multifamily Housing's project-based rental assistance program. From my position, it's frustrating because Congress passed this law and HUD simply hasn't abided by it. There are other programs going on in DC. Thankfully, the DC Inspector General uncovered an example that clearly has criminal implications where the DC Public Housing Authority was forgiving rental payments, not collecting money that's owed to HUD, i.e. the American taxpayers, and then charging others in excess of the amounts owed. And it's not clear from anything I've read that HUD is actually taking action to do anything about it. So I applaud your work, Ms. Oliver Davis, for highlighting the problems like this that are going on. And I think that's the tip of the iceberg. So when I think about the challenge of HUD, the America broadly supports a social safety net, and HUD offers one of the most important ones, housing, a place of shelter, a core need for just human survival. And it doesn't do as good a job at it as we think they could. And I think that's bipartisan. A lot of people will say, well, if you have these concerns, Republicans simply want to cut spending. Well, that's not entirely true. We support the idea of a social safety net. And frankly, if Republicans are accusing Democrats, you just want more free stuff for more people. Well, that's not entirely true. They would just want people to not have the need in the first place, ideally. But there are needs and there are challenges. And so that's why I hope that we can get one of the bills that we noticed for this hearing across the finish line, which would create 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, give them a period of time to work together. And it takes off the table the scary things, that we're going to somehow cut funding or that we're going to somehow launch more free stuff for more people and expand the scope of the programs. So what would they do? Well, my hope is, and I think the ranking member's hope is, that they would make the program better so that by the end of this 118th Congress, we could have passed a bill that not only addresses the authorizations for HUD that have lapsed, but it prioritizes the things that are most needed. That it maybe addresses benefit cliffs, maybe simplifies the role for the social worker who would sit down with someone in need of assistance, who would then look at a simple income and asset test versus a patchwork and what have you. Surely there are ways to make this system work better for the people that it's supposed to serve. Surely there are ways to manage the maintenance budget more effectively so that the houses are properly maintained. I had someone tell me that they believed that NYCHA could be run better as a literal commune, because at least the people that live there would fix the place. I don't know how that goes. We may have field hearings to kind of look at some of these situations around the country. But, Ms. Oliver Davis, when you look at what HUD does, what do you think they do best?
Oh, thank you for that question. You touched upon a number of topics that are quite important to my organization, our oversight. In terms of what HUD does well, that's something we're always striving to accomplish on our oversight, is give credit where credit's due and make sure that we highlight places where HUD has made progress. I would note it's a vast mission. As I said in my opening statement, there are 40,000 program participants that help HUD carry out that mission, so it is not without its challenges, and especially when we look at capacity challenges like we've been talking about. In terms of what HUD does well, I believe the ranking member flagged the closure of recommendations. We have worked very closely with HUD. We had over 2,000 outstanding recommendations when I became Inspector General, and that's something that HUD has worked very hard on. In addition, they are closing what I would call priority recommendations. We issued our first top priority recommendations report last year in order to focus the leadership on what's truly important.
Thank you, and we'll have to get to more. My time's expired. And I now recognize Congresswoman Velasquez, the gentlewoman from New York, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I am happy to hear you saying that you support the safety net. And I believe you. But when we look at the Appropriations Committee and the Republicans in the Appropriations Committee, they approve an estimated $131 billion cut to top-line spending level for fiscal year 24, effectively cutting next year's federal spending to FY22 levels. Under the Republican proposal, HUD programs will be cut by over $22 billion, more than a 25% cut from FY23 levels. In a letter to Ranking Member DeLauro, Secretary Fudge said that almost $1 million tenant-based and project-based Section 8 participants will lose their assistance. HUD's Public Housing Operating Fund will face a 78% cut, and almost 100,000 fewer people experiencing homelessness will lose their assistance. Inspector General Davis, your report on HUD's top management challenges highlights ensuring access to and the availability of affordable housing as a top challenge for the department for fiscal year 23, specifically citing preserving its aging housing stock as a significant concern. As you know, the public housing capital backlog is currently estimated at more than $70 billion. In your view, is there a correlation between this capital repair backlog and HUD's ability to meet this critical management challenge?
I believe that there is certainly a crisis in public housing. The capital backlog, as you pointed out, is in the billions of dollars. Funding has not kept pace with the need there. So certainly that will affect conditions going forward. Funding cuts, as you mentioned, will be the responsibility of the Secretary, certainly, to prioritize and to figure out, frankly, what to do should those funding cuts come down the pike. You know, my oversight is definitely focused on what can HUD do with what it has, certainly, and I think that is an area where HUD is struggling. It's struggling in its oversight of public housing and its program participants.
So what you're saying is that if HUD was appropriated more money to address the deterioration of its public housing infrastructure, it could address this challenge.
Well, I don't think it would be reliant solely on HUD. PHAs don't solely get their funding from HUD, so there will be a lot of judgment calls down the pike for how to address those capital needs, as well as the health and safety concerns in those housing projects.
Inspector General, your testimony also highlights decreasing utilization of the Section 8 program as a top management challenge for HUD in FY23, specifically stating that more than 191,000 authorized vouchers were unused and unfunded, but HUD would need additional appropriations to utilize these vouchers. Could you explain this finding?
We focused on voucher utilization because it's a key part of rental assistance. It's a key part in ensuring that we have affordable housing. Given the capital improvements and the aging public housing stock, the natural answer is to segue to the private sector and to find rental assistance for individuals. So we found that work to be very impactful in terms of the success of rental assistance. Our recommendation was that HUD look at optimizing the program, that they look at whether or not they had the legislative authority to reallocate funding from one section to another. There's some areas where vouchers are going unused and others where they don't simply have enough. HUD has since closed out that priority recommendation. They've issued guidance on optimizing the program. They have several things that they're exploring, and so we look for the implementation of that to see how that goes.
I just would like, thank you for that answer. I just would like to say to my colleagues on the other side that it is unfair to starve a Department of Resources and then criticize it for not meeting its mission. I yield back.
The gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Lukemeyer, who's also the chair of the Subcommittee on National Security, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome Ms. Alva Davis to our committee today, and thank you for the good work of your team. You know, this hearing is probably one of the most important we have all year from the standpoint that hearing from you and your report enables us to do our job, which is provide oversight over the agency and its programs. And so you are an integral part of that oversight. Thank you for what you do and for being here today. With that being said, did you do any sort of oversight or counting of noses on how many people actually show up for work every day at HUD?
Congressman, we've not done any work on that, actually. We did some work initially on HUD's capacity during the pandemic to go into full telework mode, but we've not done any sort of look into who's coming back into the office at this time, no.
Okay, thank you. It's a really important question from the standpoint. We see a lot of agencies that still have way too many people working from home, and it really hurts the efficiency of the agency, so thank you for that. With regards to grant management, we talked a little bit about that, I think. In your testimony, you talk about HUD's challenges in overseeing over $100 billion in federal grants, and that the office found that HUD had difficulty ensuring that grantee expenditures are eligible and supported, as well as requiring complete financial and performance information. You also found that HUD struggled with spending these funds in a timely fashion, a particular problem considering the billions in disaster grants HUD is responsible for and managing as part of the Community Development Block Grant Program. In your opinion, does HUD have the capacity and competence to effectively oversee such enormous levels of spending through these federal grants?
Congressman, I think HUD's capacity is quite limiting, and it's limiting.
Quite what?
I think HUD's capacity is quite limiting, and it's limiting throughout their portfolio. Whether we're talking about grants or we're talking about public housing or voucher assistance, frankly, it is one of the #1 top.
So when you say
challenges.
capacity to do this, they don't have the people, enough people, they don't have the people with the capabilities of doing this, they don't have the training. What's the problem with their capacity to handle the problem?
We talk to external stakeholders about HUD's capacity. They say that the skills are concentrated in particular parts of HUD's workforce, some of which are about ready to retire. We have recommendations about IT solutions that will require money. That's capacity. We have an attrition of individuals that I think has already been discussed on the committee. They've attrited 13% over 10 years at HUD. So there is a shortage of capacity in terms of all of the oversight that we're talking about. I would call it the #1 management challenge, frankly.
That begs the question, if they don't have the capacity to do this and they're handling over $100 billion, what should we do different? Should we restrict their ability to do this since we're not doing it? I know one of my questions here shortly is with regards to fraud risk management. If they can't do fraud risk management, we're just throwing money off of a roof and hope some of it lands in somebody's hands. Is that a fair characterization here?
There has to be prioritization, certainly. HUD has to do the best it can with what it has. In terms of fraud risk management, there are some things that they can do that will not require additional bodies. Now, please keep in mind, I've not done a workforce assessment of HUD, but I can tell you putting together a checklist at the program level of issues that a particular program has that makes it susceptible to fraud, that's something that can be easily accomplished in my mind. It's something that we're pushing the department to do.
Well, that brings up the question with regards to improper payments. It's been 9 years in a row now that we've seen HUD not be compliant with the Improper Payments Act. 9 years? Is it going to turn around in the next 9 years, or what do we need to do to get somebody, shake them by the shoulders and say, hey, things have got to change?
This is definitely a concern. We want HUD to be able to evaluate its programs, identify the risk for improper payments, get an estimate of improper payments, and then mitigate these things going forward. What it's going to take for the tenant-based rental assistance and the PBRA, which is 40% of HUD's expenditures, it's going to take a technological solution. It's going to take them having a platform where they can take in tenant files, secure PII, and validate the information.
Ms. Oliver Davis, you've outlined to me here today that we don't have the management, the capacity to handle a $100 billion program here. So how do we affect this program in a way that can be successful? If we're going to sit here and hope things change, that's not hope is not a solution. That's not an effective strategy. We have to have somebody's going to have to be answerable for this, and we've got to be a shakeup someplace to be able to get things changed. Otherwise, nothing's going to happen except more money being wasted. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, I believe HUD has to focus. They have to focus. They have to have the modernization of their technology, and they have to focus on the improper payments, and they have to see fraud as a risk.
So what you're saying is we need change. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentlewoman from Michigan, Ms. Tlaib, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Inspector Davis, for highlighting, the outcome of not having capacity or the resources available for HUD to do its job or to be able to follow their mission. One of the things that you mentioned is mold. You may have mentioned lead. I do, for the record, if I may, Chairman, submit a July 2020 news article titled Inkster Public Housing Exec Under Fire After 2 Baby Deaths. And the claim from the family, and there's investigation going on that they were exposed to mold or to lead in that HUD home. And so, Inspector, the outcome of not having the capacity or the resources available for HUD to implement on the ground to protect the families that are in housing is very detrimental to the communities that I represent. You had noted in your testimony that HUD has roughly 30% fewer employees than it did 10 years ago, that a common theme in your findings was that HUD does not have the capacity necessary to adjust the challenges it faces, even though we increasingly have seen the housing affordability crisis get worse every single year. Can you talk a little bit about the instances and what has resulted because of the lack of capacity that has prevented HUD from being able to effectively address the nation's housing challenges?
Well, thank you for the question. I think that we are seeing capacity and a lack of capacity play out throughout HUD's portfolio, certainly in oversight. HUD has to rely on program participants to carry out its mission, whether we're talking about public housing, we're talking about rental assistance, throughout. We're talking about grants, disaster relief, and they have to have oversight of those program participants, and they're really suffering in that respect. In terms of housing, we have quite a focus on unit conditions right now. I mean, I have launched an initiative, an environmental initiative looking at lead, looking at living conditions. I also have an initiative looking at sexual harassment in housing. But we have seen, quite frankly, failures time and time again and struggles with oversight in these areas. We've highlighted them in 2 recent reports that came out. We looked at the oversight of health and safety corrective actions in public housing, and we found that HUD did not have a nationwide standard that they were rolling out to their field offices in order to hold people accountable for correcting these problems. They weren't consistently tracking what we call emergency health and safety problems. And then something that might not be deemed an emergency, they weren't tracking at all. And then we have problems with the inspection process. You know, we have long since pointed out compromises in the REAC inspection process. And recently we reviewed the timeliness, and they're really struggling in their timeliness. They're struggling in prioritizing the right properties to make sure they're reviewed. And that calls into question the annual inspections. All the landlords have a requirement to do an annual inspection of their units. And the reason they have that requirement is because the REAC inspection has traditionally been a sample. HUD has never had the capacity to look at every unit.
Yeah.
So we have to rely on the landlords to do that as well. So all of this is being called into question.
And some of the units, a majority of them are under the City Housing Commission. How does that work? I mean, so there's a City Housing Commission that oversees some of the, really the operations in some of these housing. How are they interacting with HUD with some of your findings, Inspector?
You know, I'd be happy to talk with you about it and frankly learn something about that from you. But what I know is all these program participants have to adhere to HUD standards. They have to produce housing that is free of, is safe, sanitary, and free of hazards. So that is something where we're missing the mark.
I also, and for my colleagues to know, I read, I think it might have been your report, that half of HUD's workforce is eligible for retirement in the next 5 years. Is that correct?
I don't have that number in front of me. I did mention in my opening statement, though, that many are retirement eligible. I think that's a government-wide problem, but it certainly will exacerbate HUD's capacity issue and, frankly, their expertise.
And lastly, according to Congressional Research Service, from 2002 to 2019, HUD's regular non-emergency appropriations increased roughly like 10% adjusted to inflation, yet to take just one measure over the same nearly 2-decade period, the average sale price of a home has increased by 65% in the United States. How does your finding pictures change if we zoom out to look at the past 2+ decades? You can answer it later. Thank you.
I may need clarification. How does my finding change?
Yeah,
I'd ask
and I'll submit, Mr. Chair, through you, I will submit.
Thank you.
the
Apologies.
question.
Thank you.
Thank you. The gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Fitzgerald, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you for being here today. I'm concerned about GSE taking market share from the Federal Housing Administration. It would leave, obviously, FHA with only the riskiest mortgages. And as we know, riskier mortgages need kind of commensurate controls to ensure only eligible individuals receive FHA. Do you think there's a balance there, or enough is being done to protect taxpayers kind of from these riskier mortgages at this point?
FHA certainly has the distinction. Its loans carry the full faith and credit of the government, so it's important that HUD do its best to manage risk against the mortgage insurance fund. It's the largest mortgage insurance fund in the world. We have looked at this issue with our audit work, and we've made some priority recommendations around this. We do see a remarkable amount of ineligible mortgages become approved for FHA insurance, and we've made some recommendations around flood insurance. We see individuals with delinquent tax debt. I think the number was $13 billion in loans that HUD insured with individuals that had delinquent tax debt, and individuals with a child support offset for child support as well. So this is definitely an issue, and it's something that we're hoping that HUD will shore up. Yes.
So the situation of, for the most part, adults 25 to 35-year-old, and they simply can't enter the housing market at this point, either because they can't get the down payment or they're just being denied based on the level of income that they have. So I know that HUD offers some low down payment programs. If you look across the board of what HUD has available, are there certain things that you see as shortcomings right now, or things that need to be changed to assist kind of this decade of adults that are completely unable to purchase a home at this point?
I have those same adults in my family, so I know they are all talking to me about their struggles right now. Frankly, that would be something I believe the secretary would be better suited to address in terms of what they're offering and how they're trying to reach individuals who are trying to accomplish home ownership at this time. I can't think of anything in the moment that I see as a real shortcoming. We're really looking at the risk to the fund. I'm not aware of any programs that are causing risk right now outside of these eligibility issues to FHA.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about it kind of ad nauseum right now in financial services because everybody that comes before the committee, I try and raise a question, I know other members do as well, that, obviously with home ownership being the cornerstone of building wealth in this country, if we continue to have kind of these 25 to 35-year-olds that are being denied access to the market overall, there's got to be some flexibilities built in. So I guess what I would say is, what is HUD's role kind of in encouraging more entry-level housing? And like I said, is this something you could work with financial institutions on as well? Or how do you perceive this issue right now?
I understand the concern. Our oversight hasn't touched that necessarily. We've been looking at, the riskiest parts of HUD's portfolio and making recommendations there. I'm not sure I'm doing my best answering your question here, but I think the secretary would have some thoughts on how they can extend options for home ownership.
Yeah, I mean, in the minute I have left,
Sure.
There's kind of direct messaging that's being done to these individuals. It could be any of the social websites, it could be Instagram or whatever it might be, where they specifically talk about the difference between a 35-year-old in 1995 compared to a 35-year-old right now. The home they're trying to purchase is almost 4 times the price, and their ability to pay is not even close to being equal. I don't think anybody on the committee is trying to waive, I certainly am not, trying to waive any of the basic points that you would look at when you're trying to make a mortgage. But what we're trying to say is, I think, that if there is a way to try and accommodate or to make changes to programs that would allow them the ability to get into the market, there's a lot of different programs, obviously, on the private sector, but certainly FHA should be aware of this and should be working on it.
Thank you. The gentlewoman from Georgia, Ms. Williams, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you, Ms. Oliver Davis, for coming before the committee today and for upholding your responsibility to keep the Department of Housing and Urban Development accountable since you took office. It's disappointing to hear some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle continue to complain about HUD programs and the management of the agency when nearly 2 years ago, late October of 2021, we held a hearing to discuss the housing provisions of the Build Back Better Act. It was an opportunity to replace the dollar signs with faces, real people, to really see how much it will harm the people that we were sent here to represent. To not make these investments was devastating for a lot of people that I represent in Atlanta. To see the human impacts of the decisions that we make here in Washington should weigh heavily on all of us. At that time, 39% of all individuals experiencing homelessness in our country were Black. Y'all, we are only 12% of the US population, but 39% of Americans experiencing homelessness are Black. 2 years later, we're seeing the consequences of abandoning the housing-related provisions of the Build Back Better Act. As of last month, over 1.8 million people reported that they were at risk of eviction or foreclosure within the next 2 months. Nearly 54% are Black or Latino. I consistently remind everyone who is willing to listen that the city of Atlanta, the heart of my district, has the widest racial wealth gap in the nation. And I just heard one of my colleagues on the other side mention how home ownership is a way to build that generational wealth. And without home ownership and the provisions and the policies and the opportunities provided by your agency, that racial wealth gap only continues to widen in my home district. What I've heard and read we know that it's only going to continue to be more desperate for people that I represent until the Republican majority joins with House Democrats to put people over politics and actually look at faces and people and not just numbers and dollar signs. There's a shortage of nearly 14 million homes for families to rent or purchase. And as a member of this committee, I'm dedicated to not only filling that shortage, but ensuring that HUD has all the tools in its toolbox to ensure that families of color are not bearing the brunt of this housing crisis. Ms. Oliver Davis, it's concerning to me that the Republican majority is fighting tooth and nail to roll back spending to levels that predate current housing cost and inflation. But you can ask any realtor or anyone looking to buy a home in Atlanta, housing costs are still sky high, y'all, and there's no rolling back on those costs in sight. Returning to fiscal year 2022 funding levels will result in funding cuts to HUD programs, less affordable housing, and more families losing their home. Ms. Oliver Davis, could you provide an analysis of the impacts these funding cuts may have on HUD programs, particularly in terms of HUD's ability to address housing needs and providing assistance to vulnerable populations?
Thank you for the question. I think the HUD Secretary is best positioned to talk about how cuts could actually impact the department. Certainly in my oversight, we look at how HUD can do better with what it has. Look, less is less, right? Less money is going to translate into less aid. It's going to translate into less capacity overall. But in terms of where that money goes, how it's spent, I would have very little input or impact into that. But I believe the Secretary would certainly be able to speak to that.
Thank you. It's critical that we understand that slashing agency budgets prevent public servants from doing their jobs and serving our constituents. Anyone here who has talked to their casework teams knows that a fully staffed and properly funded agency is going to be much easier for both staff and constituents to work with. So far this Congress, the majority has both failed to convene serious housing-related hearings and neglected to include homelessness or affordable housing in their oversight plan. This lack of focus, coupled with the absence of viable legislation and solutions, raises concerns about the committee Republicans' ability to effectively tackle the challenges of affordable housing and the unhoused. Ms. Oliver Davis, in light of this, do you believe that the ongoing and proposed cuts to HUD, along with the committee Republicans' focus on program oversight investigations, hinder the potential for substantial progress in addressing our nation's affordable housing and homelessness crisis?
I would feel presumptuous trying to opine on the intent of the subcommittee and the oversight actions that it's taking. I truly would, but I appreciate the engagement. I appreciate the question.
Thank you so much. I have many more questions, but I am out of time and will submit them for the record. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Flood, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Following up on Representative Luchtemeyer's questioning, I want to touch on HUD recently submitted their congressional budget justification to the Appropriations Committee. That justification recommended a $101.834 billion budget from Congress for FY24, an increase of 35% over their enacted level in FY23. Now, it's not uncommon for any and every federal agency to advocate for more funding from Congress. However, in the case of HUD, we're talking about an agency that recently had the responsibility of doling out large amounts of COVID-related assistance, such as the Rental Assistance Program, and does not have a great track record of conducting strict oversight of the funds that it disperses. Inspector General Oliver Davis, can you summarize the results of your office's audit of HUD compliance with the Payment Integrity Information Act of 2019 and the OMB's guidance of reducing improper payments?
Thank you. This has certainly been a focus of our oversight, and what we really are hoping for here with the department and their compliance with this act is that they can take a look at their portfolio, identify areas that are susceptible for what we call improper payments, give an estimate of what they think those improper payments are likely to be, and then take action going forward to mitigate against those. What we found is that in one of HUD's largest grant programs, TBRA and project-based rental assistance, which accounts for about, I believe it's 60% of the expenditures, and I apologize if I get that incorrect, I'll correct it for the record. But I believe it's 60% of HUD's expenditures that they can't arrive at an estimate. So they're identifying it as being at risk, but they can't test the full cycle of the payment. And what that means is they can say what HUD is paying to landlords, because that's the payment that we're talking about, the money that goes to the program participants. But they can't say what happens after that. So we can't look at the money that goes to the tenants and the money and the expenditures, and we can't say for certain if those are appropriate payments that are being made. And HUD doesn't have a reliable platform to collect that information, secure it, and test it, and then give us an estimate for it. So that's really what we're talking about. It's been 6 years in a row. The last time they had an estimate on that particular pool of funding was 2016, and I believe the estimate then was $1.6 billion. So it is significant. It's a significant thing that we just don't know.
Well, to be clear, HUD was non-compliant with a law passed by Congress that was focused on preventing and reducing improper payments. Specifically, the OIG's audit found that HUD did not report improper and unknown payment estimates for 2 HUD programs that make up more than $41 billion in spending in FY22. In other words, HUD has a long way from having the kind of tools necessary to catch fraudsters reliably in programs that make up more than 60% of its budget. Inspector General Oliver Davis, can you please walk us through what the problems are with HUD's implementation of the Payment Integrity Information Act requirements?
Well, certainly. In one respect, it's technology. They need a platform that will collect tenant files, that will secure PII that is contained in those files. They normally would be able to actually manually check that information if they were to go on site and look at the files. They didn't do that during the pandemic. They're in the process of modernizing EIV, so I'm hopeful they'll get something there. But frankly, it's a technology issue. It is. They need the right platform there. They need the right platform, and they just, of course, place importance on this and make it a priority.
Would this be resolved with more resources or prioritizing resources inside the agency currently? What do you think the hurdle is here?
I think there's been significant discussion between my office and the CFO's office on improper payments. I think they're headed in a direction. I think they're looking to modernize that platform and achieve this. They've made progress. The year before, we didn't have an estimate that we consider reliable from the Harvey Irma Maria pot of money, which was also significant, but they've cleared that up. They've made strides there, so I believe we're headed in the right direction. I'm certainly hopeful. It's important.
Let me just say this. I appreciate your work as the HUD Inspector General. It is imperative that we ensure that taxpayer dollars are spent wisely and in concert with the requirements laid out by Congress. We need to ensure that money is getting into the hands of those who need it, not fraudsters who seek to manipulate the system. With that, I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman from Missouri, Ranking Member Cleaver, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you again, General Davis, for being here. You know, HUD is always being put in a tough situation, and I'll try to do this quickly. We've been dealing for almost a year with a growing problem all over this country, in the suburbs, in the urban centers, and that is deed theft. And I know that you've put out a OIG fraud bulletin, which means that you recognize the issue. The first case I've dealt with came from a couple in their early 70s in Independence, Missouri, a suburb of Kansas City. They lost their home. It was stolen. They had to go out and hire an attorney to go out to try to get their home back. I've met with local police, FBI. I met with officials in Dallas who called when they saw that we were dealing with the problem. It is exploding all over the country. $350 million in fraudulent taking of homes all over the country. It is growing. And when you add the likelihood that we're going to start having cyber title theft. There's some of that already going on, so it's just going to get worse. And so we're in a situation, HUD needs to deal with the issue, and we need to deal with it right now. You know, I have a bill, the Good Deed Act, designed to try to you know, create at least the awareness. But, you know, it's going to cost $10 million, whatever, a year. And then if you say to HUD, this is an important program, people are losing their homes, but you have to take the $10 million somewhere else. You know, you're squeezing the water in the balloon. We're going to have a problem. And I have become really concerned about this as black, white, suburbs, urban, New York, Los Angeles, Hollywood. People are losing their homes. And I know you're aware of it, but, and I don't think your office can handle it. You know, I know you're dealing with it in terms of awareness, but what can be done? And I mean, it's my bill puts the responsibility on HUD, but then it costs money. And so we say, well, we can't do this because it costs money. Thousands of people are losing their homes.
You mentioned our fraud bulletin. We attempt to issue those when there's something that is just so important that we need the public to know about it immediately. As soon as we started hearing about that scheme, we issued that bulletin. I haven't studied, frankly, what HUD can do about it. I'd love to learn more about that. I appreciate hearing about all the various examples that your constituents are suffering from. It's a terrible thing. It's something I'd have to investigate a bit more, talk to my staff about, but I would love to talk to you about it more.
Yeah, I know more about it than I want to know.
I'm certain.
Because I sat with the police captain in Kansas City who assigned to doing it. And just imagine this, you stop getting mail. So you're thinking, well, you know, I'm mad at the U.S. Postal Service. And then you find out you're not getting mail because somebody has taken your name and your address, and, you know, they're now in control of your life.
Yes.
And, well, you know all of that. I get excited about it because I've sat down and had this discussion with people crying because they lost their homes. And HUD needs to deal with it. I would love to have a conversation with you.
Absolutely. I would welcome that. I would welcome that, certainly.
I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you. The gentlewoman from Colorado, Ms. Pedersen, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you, Ms. Davis, for being with us today. My 3-year-old son's name is Davis, so I'm a big fan of your name and also a huge fan of your work. I just want to thank you for the critical work that you and your team are doing every day to support our most vulnerable people, to support those first-time home buyers. For me, this is a very important, one of the programs specifically is very important to me. My mom was one of the lucky ones who was able to qualify through the housing voucher program. And so it is because of that program that my mom was able to stay housed. She would absolutely not be alive today without that support. And I can only imagine how much money your agency is saving the U.S. Every day at the local level because of keeping people housed. One of the difficulties that my mom, well, I can say that she was one of the lucky ones, but my dad, unfortunately, was one of the ones who was denied because the wait list was so long in Colorado. I was surprised to see that there, in a report that you submitted in November 2020, that the estimate was that 62% of the public housing agencies had unused vouchers. So I'd love to talk about what you are doing to make sure that you can increase the numbers of vouchers being utilized and what you're doing to make sure that it is more appealing, or what we can do to make sure it's more appealing for private owners.
Well, thank you for pointing out our work. The Housing Choice Voucher Program is certainly important in going towards solving the affordability crisis that we see in this country. In terms of landlords, we have certainly recognized in our work that landlords often don't participate in this program. It is a problem. Just because someone gets a voucher, it doesn't mean for certain that they're going to get a home. And often they have to relocate and go elsewhere to find the home, away from family, away from their source of income, or simply away from their just community where they want to be. So there are challenges. I believe HUD is working to study landlord incentives for participating in the program. That's what we've learned during our work. In terms of the Housing Choice Voucher Program, we made a priority recommendation to the department that they look at the vouchers that are going unused. They have closed out that recommendation. They have issued guidance that should help PHAs optimize their program with very specific tools. You know, this is a new development, and this is something that we'll look for the implementation of, and we're very hopeful that it reaches people who need these vouchers.
Great, thank you very much for that. And I know that something that you've covered in your testimony, a common theme is that the oversight findings has been that HUD does not have the capacity necessary to address the challenges that you face. We know that we continue to ask you to do more. The needs are so great, but you are understaffed and underfunded, and your IT is significantly outdated. What would it look like if we actually invested in the work that we're asking you to do, and how different would those outcomes be if we did what we needed it to on our side?
You know, I'll echo my comments about capacity. HUD's capacity is strained. You know, we hear that from external stakeholders, both stakeholders that represent housing owners and developmental entities, as well as people that represent tenant-based groups. So we're hearing this from all across HUD's portfolio. I know through my work, you know, they have technology challenges that itself is a capacity challenge, and will take funding and prioritization to fix. The secretary is really the best person, I think, though, to set and talk about an influx of funding and how it might help her. But I can certainly speak to that in the realms of the risk that we see in our work as the oversight entity, certainly.
We have a little bit of time left. What programs are you most proud of that you think our constituents should know about?
Well, I think I'm certainly proud of the work that we're doing overseeing the programs. HUD has a very, very, very important mission. I know if the secretary were sitting here, she would have many things to say about her pride in the programs and what they're doing for the country. I certainly have pride in our work. We're trying to make HUD the best it can possibly be with our oversight. That's our goal. That is our mission at the end of the day. So that's what I would say I'm most proud of. The people of HUD OIG are serving the community very well these days. They're making very good impact into HUD's programs.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentlewoman from California, Ranking Member Waters, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and I'm very pleased about this hearing today because there are so many unanswered questions about housing. The one thing that we do know is we need more housing. We're in a crisis in this country. And I'd like to ask, in terms of your responsibility, usually I think of your capacity that you're looking at what happens inside HUD, what the personnel is doing, et cetera. I want to know how far does that extend? For example, if you discover that vouchers are not being used, do you go so far as to deal with the issues about why they're not being used? There are some communities that discriminate. They do not want Section 8 vouchers in their community. We had that problem in Los Angeles County. Does your investigation go that far as to say, yes, you have vouchers that are unused, but let me tell you what we know about what's happening in, say, San Bernardino County?
Well, thank you for the question. We certainly look at the effectiveness of the program. So we look at how effective the program participants are in carrying out HUD's mission. If we see something that falls within our purview to actually open an investigation, we will certainly do so. If we see something that would be a fair housing violation, that would be something for the department to look at in their capacity, we would refer that to the department as well. We are looking for any kind of wrongdoing or abuse or waste that touch these programs.
Oh, that's very good to know. Let me raise another question. Do you realize how long a person has to utilize that voucher? Is there not a cutoff date for the length of time they're holding that voucher?
That's a very good question. I don't know the specifics of that. I do not.
I think there is a problem there. After a certain length of time, I think the voucher is no good. Please check that out, because if that's the case, we need to understand those communities where the housing is not easily available, and they need to look and look and look and find a landlord that will take that voucher, and that may take more time. So would you take a look at that also, please?
I will look into that. I would love to talk to you more about that, to see if that is a far-reaching program. If you are having experiences with that, hearing about that from your constituents, I would love to hear about that.
In addition to that, I heard you allude to the landlords, and there are complaints about, the local housing authorities and how they manage their responsibility working with HUD. And there are some complaints about whether or not they are required to do too much in order to get a person in. For example, if they find a vacant apartment, if the person finds it, and the housing authority has a responsibility for putting it in its top shape as mandated by HUD. What is being done to shorten that length of time but ensure it is safe and it is secure? Do you have any idea about things like that?
Can I ask for clarification? Are you speaking about when they initially do an inspection before a tenant moves in?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, I'm aware that is what is supposed to happen, that a unit should be inspected before a new tenant comes in. I'm aware of overall challenges with the inspection process, and we're now aware of challenges with annual inspections on the part of landlords. I can't speak to that particular issue in my work. I can't, but I'd love to hear more about that if you're aware of shortcomings
what I'd
there.
like to know is whether there is a time certain that the housing authority must get that tenant ready, get that apartment ready for the tenants. Or can they take 3 months to do it, or 4 months? Or do they have to do it in 30 days? And if it's not being done, is that part of what you do? Now, I'm asking you a lot of questions beyond what I think, and I've always thought you were supposed to do, but maybe you know more about it. How far does it go?
I think those are great questions. They're things that I would like to know more about, but I confess I don't know if there's a standard length of time that they have to inspect before a tenant enters a unit. I don't know that. That may very well be reflected in our work somewhere, and I would want to get back to you on that.
Well, thank you. We have 3 or 4 things we need to talk about and delve into. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Thank you, Inspector General Oliver Davis, for appearing before us today. As the representative for a district that is predominantly Hispanic and which also includes one of the poorest counties in the entire nation, I'm deeply concerned about the Department of Housing and Urban Department's ability to consistently and safely execute its public housing mandate. Inspector, with a simple yes or no, does HUD have the capability today to ensure on a consistent basis that its grant programs are not exposed to instances of waste, fraud, and abuse?
You're giving me a tall order here. I think it would be difficult to always ensure that grants are free of fraud. To me, that seems like something that is very difficult to do regardless of capacity.
So with that asked, is there a better way to steward the dollars, the taxpayer dollars, that are being used right now in HUD?
There are several recommendations that we have made that we deem priority that would certainly help in that respect. We have what we call slow spenders in the world of grants, in the world of disaster relief. And those are entities that take a longer time to spend the money. We find in our oversight work the longer funds hang out there, the more susceptible to fraud they become. So we have made a priority recommendation for the department to work more closely with grantees, to ask them for projections on spending and to hold them accountable when they don't meet those, and to work with them to find out why, in order to set a course for a better future for that grant and that grantee going forward. So that's something that we could do. We could work closer with slow spenders. Fraud risk management is something that I can't speak enough about. It is a very important activity that we are urging the department to undertake. It's something they need to be doing at the program level. So if we're talking about a grant, the people that administer that particular grant, the people that get that particular program off the ground, they're best suited to talk about fraud in that program and to put anti-fraud measures in place and to do the testing. Again, the improper payment testing is crucial. All these things go hand in hand. So yes.
So what I'm hearing is that currently there is no system in place to see what type of fraud is happening in the grant programs. Has there been a study done?
A study on particular types of fraud? Yes. So we at HUD OIG, along with PRAC, the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee, which I serve on, we did a series of audit work looking at fraud in virtually every program that was touched by the CARES Act and the American Rescue Plan. And we put together a fraud risk inventory for all of these programs. We identified dozens of risk factors, sometimes 60 fraud schemes. So we have, in fact, put that information out there, and we've urged HUD to use it in its own assessments of its programs. So yes.
And have they used those suggestions?
I believe we're making progress in that area. We've talked about it quite a bit. I know that CPD in particular has made some strategic hires of individuals who have some anti-fraud backgrounds. I know that the CFO is interested in getting fraud risk assessments off the ground. So we are working towards that. However, our recommendations remain open. So it remains to be seen.
When were these recommendations made?
Oh, they were during the pandemic. I'm taxing my brain for the exact date of those, but it was during the pandemic.
So a couple years ago?
Within the last couple of years, we did that work, yes.
So it's very concerning to me when we've done an internal audit, or when you all have done an internal audit, have found findings where there are, as you said, several cases of fraud. However, it's taken 2 years and you're still just talking about it. It's time that we implement these measures so that we can look for dollars that are being wastefully spent and use them to people who really need those dollars. With that, I yield back. I now recognize the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Garcia, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. Davis, for coming today. I understand that you're the first one in 5 years to come down and visit with us, so I hope we're both learning from each other today. One of the things that really struck me from the report that you gave us was the number of outstanding or open unimplemented recommendations from OIG audits. 985. Well, that sounds like a lot today. How old are these items? Are they all these that weren't found last year or the year before? Have you aged these and determined how far back we've had them on the books?
We have aged these. I don't have those numbers off the top of my head. I will tell you that we've closed many recommendations in the last 4 years. We concentrated first and foremost on some of the older ones. So I suspect that we're dealing with more recent recommendations, but I would want to get back to you on that exactly on how old some of these are. There may be some aged ones.
Can you tell us how many were findings or unopened since before January 2021?
Wish I could. I don't have those numbers in front of me, but I will certainly get those to you.
How long have you been Inspector General at HUD?
Since 2019.
So 2019. So you're familiar with many of these then?
I am, and some of these certainly predate me, and they span administrations and policy changes, certainly, yes.
So some of these audit findings are not just within the last 28 months of the current administration. These are carryovers, in fact, from the prior Trump administration.
I would expect we have some beyond them.
Because in fact, you've actually had some findings about the lack of attention to some of these issues with Secretary Carson before Secretary Fudge. And some of these were management alerts for unreasonable delays in HUD OIG access to departments' information, which caused OIG oversight efforts to be diluted, to become stale or worse, halted entirely. So is that still an existing challenge? Have you been able to correct that with the current administration? Are you getting timely information? Do they have the staffing requirements to be able to implement these, or what seems to be the problem?
I've asked my staff to keep me abreast of any issues we have regarding access or delays in getting electronically stored information, and I've not been made aware of any.
So you currently don't have any challenges with dealing with Secretary Fudge?
Secretary Fudge and I meet regularly. We issued a joint cooperation memo. I think we have a workable relationship, certainly.
Right, and what are your plans to be able to reduce this backlog?
We work on this all the time, frankly. This is a concentrated effort between us and HUD leadership. We have a number of teams. The CIO's team works with our people. The CFO's team works with our people to reduce these outstanding recommendations. You know, we've done our first priority recommendations report last year in order to really focus leadership on the things that we think are the most important, the things that we think should rise to the top. So that's how we'll proceed going forward.
And what criteria do you use for deciding what rises to the top? Is it based on the savings that you could get from some implementation, or is it the efficiencies to the programs, or is it better oversight on the management? Or give me a sense of what criteria you use to establish. I mean, when I saw the number again, I mean, 985, that's almost 1,000.
It was
You
much
can't tell
larger
me
than that.
today how many you've done. So in my mind, it's still 1,000 till I get that letter from you telling me, no, we've already closed another 300. But 985 is a hell of a lot.
It's a lot, and I appreciate your interest in that, and I appreciate your interest in our efforts to close those recommendations. With the top recommendations report, you know, we're really doing risk assessments constantly. That's how we decide what work to look at, is the riskiest parts of HUD's portfolio. So our top recommendations span the portfolio. There are things like lead hazards. There are things like radon. Those are certainly of the utmost importance. Then there are things with a bigger risk fiscal impact. You know, we discussed earlier the ineligible loans that receive HUD insurance. Sometimes those were in the $13 billion range. So it really, each one is different, but they're very impactful and of the high risk areas in the portfolio.
All right, well, my time is running out, but I look forward to your document showing me the aging of the 985 and how many were inherited on January 2021. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Lawler, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Inspector General of the New York City Housing Authority, known as NYCHA, has a long history of mismanagement and corruption, which has created unsafe and unacceptable living conditions for thousands of New York City residents. In 2021, the Brooklyn District Attorney charged 9 NYCHA contractors with bribery as part of a kickback scheme. Your office recently participated in an investigation that led to the sentencing of 2 NYCHA superintendents for accepting bribes from contractors. It seems that every time you turn around, someone tied to NYCHA goes to jail for one form of corruption or the other. Inspector General, in 2019, New York City formally committed to addressing the serious problems with living conditions in NYCHA housing as part of an agreement with HUD, the EPA, and the Southern District of New York. In your opinion, have they fulfilled this commitment?
You're referencing the monitor that was assigned to NYCHA. We have not reviewed the activity of the monitor. We keep an eye on NYCHA. We look at their reports as they come out. We have
I'm sorry, who does the monitor report to?
That's a good question. I'm assuming, I don't want to get out too far on the issue with the monitor and be incorrect. So I would have to get back to you on that.
Okay, but when you say that we have not reviewed any of the actions of the monitor, so did HUD not enter into an agreement with NYCHA with respect to improving the living conditions of its residents?
I believe HUD I believe HUD's party to the agreement with the monitor. We, as the oversight agency, we're not party to that agreement. And when I say we didn't look at the monitor, we do look at the reports that the monitor puts out. And we take NYCHA into concern when we're looking at our work. We learn from NYCHA, and we have several investigations involving NYCHA, as you pointed out.
Who administers the federal funds that goes to NYCHA?
The HUD, the government, yes, HUD does.
So you're telling me that we continue to administer federal funds. NYCHA was party to an agreement with HUD, with the Southern District of New York, with the EPA on serious problems with living conditions, and we haven't done anything to talk to the monitor. We haven't done anything to provide oversight of the serious failures of NYCHA?
I confess, Congressman, I have not spoken to the monitor. Perhaps I should speak to the monitor.
I would strongly recommend when you leave here today, you might want to pick up the phone.
Okay, and I'd be happy to speak with you about this and learn what you know about this. I would be happy to.
Oh, I can tell you, last year, being part of the New York State Assembly, I voted down the New York City Public Housing Preservation Trust because it was nothing more than a scam. New York City Public Housing was changing the way that it was getting funding as part of this scam. So it was using tenant protection vouchers instead of Section 9 so they can get more money. And yet you're telling me not only are we giving them more money now, but we're not providing any oversight?
I believe the monitor is providing oversight. I can't speak to the quality of that oversight, frankly. I can't. I can tell you we do investigations.
Whose job is it to investigate the quality of that oversight?
I am not certain who the monitor reports to. I will do my best to find out.
That's just remarkable. So, given that, based on your testimony, you have not had any conversations with the monitor, you're frankly unaware of what the monitor has been doing. Is that what you're testifying today?
We speak to the department. I speak to the Southern District of New York. We ask for updates periodically, and we read the reports that come out. And we also conduct our own independent investigations into activities at NYCHA.
Okay, so what independent investigations have you recently conducted that would answer my original question, which is, has NYCHA fulfilled its commitment to improve the health and living standards for its residents?
We conducted an investigation of a lead worker at NYCHA who was a whistleblower who came forward, and we uncovered hundreds of inspections at NYCHA that did not live up to the lead safe hazard rule. They were falsifying documents. They were getting out of visual inspections because of the falsification of those documents. And it caused me to start my entire initiative looking at health and safety issues in public housing.
And yet what HUD is doing is giving NYCHA more money, despite its failures to improve the living conditions of its residents. It's shameful, and I would strongly encourage you to meet with the as the Inspector General, to meet with the monitor immediately.
The gentleman's time has expired. I'd like to thank our witness for her testimony today. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit additional written questions for the witness to the chair, which will be forwarded to the witness for her response. I ask our witness to please respond as promptly as you are able. This hearing is now adjourned.